Picture this: a pair of old, weathered hands folding a napkin just so, aligning it with the edge of a worn oak table, as if the fate of the world depends on that perfect right angle. That's me, Eliza, at 72, still fussing over details that don't matter to anyone but me. Or maybe to Harold, my husband of 48 years, who's sitting across from me right now, peering over his wire-rimmed glasses at the morning paper, his brow furrowed like he's decoding some ancient text. I've watched that same expression for decades, the way his lips purse just slightly when he's deep in thought, as if the world's problems could be solved with enough focus. He's always been like that, reserved, brilliant in his quiet way, and meticulous to a fault. I swear, if you looked up methodical in the dictionary, you'd find a black and white photo of Harold, probably adjusting his tie with a ruler to ensure it's centered. Our life together? It's a Swiss watch, ticking along with precision you could set your calendar by. Breakfast is at 7 on the dot, 2 eggs over easy for him, oatmeal with a drizzle of honey for me, and coffee so black it could double as ink. We don't speak much during those meals, not because there's nothing to say, but because we've said it all before. By 10 at night, we're in bed, lights out after a quick, perfunctory goodnight kiss, always on the cheek, never lingering. It's a rhythm we've perfected, a dance with no missteps, no surprises. And for the longest time, I've told myself that's a good thing. Stability, after all, is a rare gift at our age. But if I'm honest, and I'm not sure I've ever been, not even with myself, there's a part of me that feels like I've been living in a quiet cage. The bars made of routine so familiar, I've stopped noticing them. I've never said that out loud, though. Not to Harold, not to anyone. How could I? He's given me a life of order, of safety. What right do I have to want more? Still, every now and then, something small disrupts the mechanism of our days, and I catch myself holding my breath, waiting to see if the whole clock will stop. This past summer, we had one of those rare disruptions, a wedding of all things. Harold's cousin Marjorie was getting married for the 3rd time, and we were invited to the celebration upstate. A whole weekend away from our little house, our predictable meals, our unchanging evenings. I remember packing my suitcase with a flutter in my chest, like a schoolgirl sneaking out for the first time. A weekend of laughter, of music, of people we hadn't seen in years. It felt like a tiny rebellion against the life we'd built. Not that Harold saw it that way, of course. He was already mapping out the drive, calculating the exact minute we'd need to leave to avoid traffic, his pen scratching out the itinerary with military precision. But as we pulled up to the wedding venue, even his carefully laid plans seemed to fade into the background. I couldn't help but gasp at the sight before us. It was a grand old estate, tucked away deep in the woods, surrounded by towering pines that seemed to guard the place like ancient sentinels. The air was thick with the scent of white roses, blooming in wild abundance along every path and archway, their fragrance mixing with the crisp, earthy smell of the forest. It felt like stepping into a fairy tale, a world so far removed from our tidy little life that I almost didn't know how to breathe in it. As we walked through the manicured gardens, the sounds of the celebration wrapped around me like a warm blanket. The clinking of wine glasses rang out in a delicate symphony, punctuated by bursts of laughter from guests who seemed to have shed their everyday selves for the night. Children darted between tables, their giggles rising above the murmur of conversation, while older folks reminisced in clusters, their voices carrying stories of times long past. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the fairy lights strung through the trees flickered to life, casting a soft golden glow over everything. It was magical, like the whole estate was holding its breath, waiting for something extraordinary to happen. And for once, I let myself believe it might. The night unfolded with a kind of reckless joy I hadn't felt in years. Champagne flowed freely, the bubbles tickling my nose as I sipped from a flute that seemed to refill itself every time I turned around. The dance floor was a whirlwind of color and movement, couples spinning under the lights, their faces flushed with laughter and exertion. I found myself swaying to the music, my hips remembering rhythms I thought I'd forgotten, dancing until the early hours with people whose names I couldn't recall the next day. There was a rare sense of abandon in the air, a feeling that for just one night, the rules didn't apply, not the ones I'd lived by for decades anyway. It was as if the estate itself was whispering to me, urging me to let go, to be someone else, just for a little while. But not everyone was swept up in the revelry. True to form, Harold excused himself early in the evening, barely an hour after the toasts. He leaned in close, his voice low and clipped, saying he needed a couple of hours to check something with the organizers. I nodded, used to his need for control, watching as he adjusted his tie with that precise mechanical gesture of his posture stiff as a board. He walked off toward the main house, his steps measured, disappearing into the shadows beyond the garden. I stood there for a moment, feeling a strange mix of relief and loneliness wash over me. Relief, because I didn't have to match his restraint for once. Loneliness, because even in this sea of celebration, I felt the weight of his absence like a stone in my chest. But I shook it off, letting the music pull me back into the swirl of the night. I wandered through the garden, the cool grass brushing against my ankles, the fairy lights twinkling like stars caught in the branches above. That's when I saw him, Theo, standing across the garden near a stone bench, apart from the crowd as if he'd carved out his own little world. He was quiet, almost too still, dressed in a dark suit with no tie, the top button of his shirt undone, like he couldn't be bothered with formality. There was something aloof about him, something that made me pause, my breath catching just a little. I didn't know him, not really, but I'd heard Harold mention him once or twice. A friend of the groom, someone from a chapter of life Harold rarely spoke about. Theo's eyes caught mine for a split second, sharp and unreadable, before he looked away, taking a slow sip from his glass. I don't know why I kept watching him. Maybe it was the way he seemed to exist outside the celebration, untouched by the laughter and the chaos, or maybe it was something deeper, something I couldn't name. I turned away, pretending to admire the roses, but my gaze kept drifting back. And then, as if he'd felt it, he started walking toward me. My heart did a little stutter, though I told myself it was nothing, just the champagne fizzing through my veins. He stopped by the fountain where I'd paused, the water trickling softly behind us, and his voice came low, almost a murmur, but so familiar it sent a jolt through me. "Eliza," he said, like he'd known me forever, and before I could even nod, he handed me a glass of champagne, the cold crystal brushing my fingers. I took it, more out of reflex than anything, and managed a small, "Thank you," my voice quieter than I meant it to be. We stood there, the noise of the party fading into a distant hum, and talked. Not the small talk I'd been making all night, but something real, something raw. He asked me about dreams I'd forgotten I ever had, things I wanted when I was young, before life became a series of checklists and routines. I found myself telling him about the art classes I'd abandoned, the trips I'd never taken, the wild, reckless version of myself I'd buried under decades of practicality. And he listened, really listened, his eyes locked on mine with an intensity that made my skin prickle. He spoke, too, about hidden desires, about moments he'd let slip through his fingers, his words weaving a thread between us that felt dangerous and alive. I hadn't felt that kind of pull in years, maybe ever, and it scared me as much as it thrilled me. Then the wind picked up, catching a strand of my hair and tossing it across my face. Before I could brush it away, Theo reached out, his hand grazing my cheek, tucking the strand behind my ear. His touch was light, barely there, but it sent a shiver racing down my spine, sharp and electric. I froze, my breath hitching, the world narrowing to the space between us. I could smell the faint cedar of his cologne, see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, and for a moment, I forgot where I was, who I was. But then he stepped back, just enough to break the spell, and his voice dropped even lower, almost a whisper. "Harold arranged everything," he said, his words slicing through the haze in my mind. "Said you needed to show your true self." I blinked, the champagne glass nearly slipping from my fingers. My heart started pounding, a wild, uneven rhythm as I tried to make sense of what he'd just said. Harold? My Harold, the man who planned every minute of our lives with the precision of a surgeon, orchestrating something like this, it didn't fit. It couldn't. I opened my mouth to ask what he meant, to demand an explanation, but the words wouldn't come. My mind was spinning, replaying every moment of the night, every odd detail, Harold's early departure, his cryptic excuse I stood there by the fountain, the trickle of water a faint echo in my ears, as Theo's words hung between us like a heavy fog. My mind was a whirlwind, grasping at fragments of logic, trying to piece together a puzzle I didn't even know existed until this moment. Harold arranging something for me to show my true self? It felt like a riddle carved in stone, unyielding and impossible to decipher. I wanted to press Theo, to demand clarity, but before I could find my voice, he gestured toward the main house with a subtle tilt of his head. "Come with me," he said, his tone soft but firm, like he already knew I'd follow. And despite the chaos in my chest, I did. We walked in silence through the garden, the fairy lights casting long shadows across the path, the distant laughter of the wedding guests fading into a murmur. My heels clicked against the stone walkway, each step feeling heavier than the last, as if I were walking toward something inevitable. Theo led me through a side entrance of the estate, away from the bustle of the celebration, into a quieter wing where the air felt thicker, older, like it held secrets in its walls. He opened a door to a small room, the kind you'd expect to find in a place like this, ornate but intimate, with dark wood paneling and a fireplace crackling in the corner, its amber glow dancing across the walls. The silence here was different, heavier, broken only by the soft snap of burning logs. I stopped just inside the threshold, my breath shallow, feeling the weight of being in a space so far removed from the life I knew. Theo turned to face me, his expression a mix of patience and something else, expectation, maybe, or understanding. He didn't rush me, didn't push, just stood there with his hands in his pockets, watching me with those sharp, unreadable eyes. Then, in a voice so quiet it almost blended with the fire's crackle, he said, "You don't have to." Those 4 words landed like a stone in still water, rippling through me, stirring up a storm of doubt and longing I'd kept buried for so long. I felt the weight of choice pressing down on me, a physical thing, squeezing my chest until I could barely breathe. I didn't even know what he was offering, not fully, but I knew it was a line I'd never crossed before, a line I wasn't sure I could come back from. My mind drifted, unbidden, to Harold. I saw him as he always was, seated at our kitchen table, his fingers adjusting the newspaper with surgical precision, his face a mask of quiet control. I thought of our life together, the endless monotony of it, every day mapped out, every emotion measured and contained. I remembered the way he'd look at me sometimes, not with warmth or curiosity, but with a kind of detached satisfaction, like I was a problem he'd solved long ago. And beneath that memory, older and sharper, was a longing I'd smothered decades before. A hunger for something raw, something real, something that didn't come with a schedule or a set of rules. I'd told myself I didn't need it, that I was past wanting such things, but standing here now, I felt that buried ache clawing its way to the surface, desperate to breathe. My hands trembled as I clasped them together, the cool metal of my wedding band biting into my skin, the heat of the room pressed against me, the fire's warmth mingling with the sweat prickling at the back of my neck. I caught a glimpse of myself in an old gilded mirror on the wall, and I barely recognized the woman staring back. My eyes were wide, almost wild, my cheeks flushed not just from the champagne, but from something deeper, something I couldn't name. I looked like a stranger, someone who'd slipped out of the careful shell I'd built over a lifetime. My reflection seemed to challenge me, daring me to step forward or turn back, to choose who I'd be in this moment. I stood there, frozen, the crackling of the fire filling the silence as my thoughts churned. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to decide, to either shatter the mold of my life or cling to the safety of the familiar. But in that moment, with Theo's quiet presence filling the room and the fire casting flickering shadows across his face, I made a choice I never thought I'd make. I stepped forward, crossing that invisible line, letting myself fall into the unknown. What happened next isn't something I can put into words, not fully, not yet. It was a collision of longing and regret, a moment that felt both like a betrayal and a reclaiming of something I'd lost long ago. Time seemed to dissolve, the world outside that small, ornate room fading until there was nothing but the heat of the fire and the weight of what I'd done. When it was over, a heavy silence settled between us. I couldn't look at Theo as I adjusted my dress, my fingers fumbling with the fabric, my heart still racing in my chest. He didn't meet my eyes either, his movement slow and deliberate as he straightened his shirt, the air between us thick with unspoken words. It wasn't shame, not exactly, but a kind of raw vulnerability that made every breath feel like a confession. I could hear the faint crackle of the fireplace, a reminder of where we were, of what had just happened, but it was drowned out by the pounding in my ears. My gaze drifted to the corner of the room, where a small camera sat on a tripod, its red light blinking steadily, unyielding, a silent witness to everything. My stomach twisted at the sight, a creeping dread slithering up my spine. Had it been there the whole time? Had I just not noticed, too caught up in the moment to see? Or had someone, Harold maybe, placed it there knowing exactly what would unfold? The thought made my skin crawl, the implications too vast, too dark to grasp all at once. I wanted to ask Theo, to demand answers, but my throat was tight, the words trapped behind a wall of fear and confusion. I needed to get out of that room, away from the suffocating weight of it all. I muttered something incoherent, a half-formed excuse, and moved toward the door, my legs unsteady beneath me. Theo didn't stop me, didn't say a word, just watched as I stumbled out into the corridor. The cool air of the hallway hit me like a slap, a sharp contrast to the heat I'd left behind, but it did little to clear the fog in my mind. My steps were uneven as I navigated the dimly lit passage, the ornate wallpaper blurring into streaks of gold and crimson as I fought to steady my breathing. With each step, the sounds of the wedding party grew louder, a distant hum swelling into a cacophony of laughter and music that felt jarring, almost mocking. It was as if the celebration had carried on without me, oblivious to the earthquake that had just torn through my world. My hand smoothed over my dress again, a nervous tick, as if I could erase the evidence of what I'd done, as if I could step back into the person I'd been just hours ago. But I knew I couldn't. That version of me was gone, shattered in a room I'd never forget. As I approached the main hall, the glow of chandeliers spilled through the open doors of the ballroom, casting long golden beams across the polished floor. My pulse hadn't slowed, my mind still reeling with questions about that camera, about Theo's words, about Harold's role in all of this. I was so lost in the storm of my thoughts that I almost didn't see him at first. But there he was, standing near the ballroom entrance, his posture as composed as ever, hands clasped behind his back like he'd been waiting for me all along. Harold, my husband, the man who'd built the framework of my life with such precision that I'd never thought to question it. His suit was immaculate, not a wrinkle in sight, his tie perfectly centered as always, but it was his eyes that stopped me cold, sharp, knowing, piercing through me, like they could see every secret I'd tried to bury in that small room. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as a wave of nausea rolled over me. Harold's gaze didn't waver, not for a second, and in that moment, I felt like a specimen under a microscope, every flaw and hidden thought laid bare. He didn't say a word at first, just tilted his head slightly, a faint, unreadable smile playing at the corners of his mouth. It wasn't warmth or anger. It was something else, something calculated, like he'd already anticipated every move I'd made that night. My hands clenched at my sides, the fabric of my dress crumpling under my grip, as I struggled to find something to say, anything to break the suffocating silence. But before I could, he spoke, his voice as steady and measured as ever. "Enjoying the evening, Eliza?" he asked, the words so ordinary, so mundane, that they felt like a slap. I stammered a response, something about the music and the guests, but my voice sounded hollow, even to my own ears. He nodded, as if my answer was exactly what he'd expected, and then turned away, gesturing for me to follow him back to our room. I did, my legs moving on autopilot, each step feeling like I was sinking deeper into quicksand. The drive home the next day was a blur, the miles stretching out in silence between us. I stared out the window, watching the trees whip by, my mind replaying every moment of that night. The heat of Theo's touch, the blinking red light of the camera, and Harold's piercing stare. When we finally pulled into our driveway, the familiar sight of our little house felt like a mockery of normalcy. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to shatter the quiet that had always defined us, but I didn't. Instead, I unpacked my suitcase with trembling hands, hung my dress in the closet as if it weren't a reminder of everything that had changed, and slipped back into the rhythm of our life as if nothing had happened. Breakfast at 7, oatmeal with honey for me, eggs for him. The goodnight kiss at 10, a fleeting brush on the cheek, as mechanical as ever. On the surface, it was the same Swiss watch routine, ticking along with ruthless precision, but beneath it, there was a new current, an unspoken tension that hummed like a live wire between us. I could feel it in the way the air seemed to thicken when we were in the same room, in the way every silence felt loaded, heavy with things neither of us would say. And then there were the small, eerie changes, the kind you might miss if you weren't looking for them. I started noticing Harold's lingering glances, the way his eyes would settle on me a moment too long when he thought I wasn't paying attention. It wasn't affection or concern. It was something colder, more analytical, like he was studying me, cataloging every reaction. One morning, as he stood by the mirror adjusting his tie, I caught a cryptic smile on his face, a slight curl of his lips that vanished as soon as he saw me watching. It sent a chill down my spine, a quiet warning I couldn't quite decipher. And then there was the locked drawer in his study. I'd never paid much attention to his desk before. It was his space, after all, a sanctuary of order I rarely entered. But one afternoon, as I passed by the open door, I saw it. A small, unassuming drawer with a shiny new lock glinting in the sunlight. I don't know why it struck me as odd, but it did. In 48 years, I'd never known Harold to lock anything away from me. What could be so important, so secret, that he needed to keep it hidden now? I stood there for a moment, staring at it, my fingers itching to test the handle, but I didn't. Not yet. The thought of what I might find, or what he might do if he caught me, kept me rooted in place. I'm not sure how to feel about any of this, if I'm honest. Part of me is haunted by what happened at the wedding, by the memory of that camera's unblinking eye, by Harold's cryptic words, and the way he seemed to know more than he let on. I decide that the only way to find peace is to confront Harold and uncover the truth behind his enigmatic gaze. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment if you enjoyed this story. This will help us create more engaging stories for you.